They say blood runs thicker than water, but what happens when the person who shares your DNA becomes the very threat to your existence? My name is Emma Richardson, and 3 days before what should have been the happiest day of my life, I discovered that my own sister had been slowly poisoning me. But here's the twist that nobody saw coming, including me. Her betrayal didn't destroy me. It saved my life in ways I never could have imagined. This is the story of how the worst act of sibling rivalry led to the most important discovery about my health, how a wedding dress became a hospital gown, and how the person I trusted most became the catalyst for everything I needed to know about myself. Sometimes the universe works in mysterious ways, and sometimes it takes a betrayal to reveal a truth that could have killed you.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light filtered through the gauze curtains of my childhood bedroom in Riverside, California, casting everything in that golden hue that makes ordinary moments feel cinematic. I was 24 years old, 3 days away from marrying the love of my life and living what most people would call a charmed existence. My fiancé, Jake Morrison, was everything a girl could want. Kind, successful, devastatingly handsome, and completely devoted to making me happy. We'd met during our senior year at UC San Diego, where I was finishing my degree in elementary education, and he was completing his MBA. The wedding preparations had consumed the last 8 months of my life. Every detail had been meticulously planned, from the ivory silk dress hanging in my closet, a custom creation that had cost more than my first car, to the elaborate floral arrangements that would transform the Riverside Mission Inn into our personal fairy tale. My mother, Patricia Richardson, had thrown herself into the planning with the intensity of a military general, coordinating with vendors, managing guest lists, and ensuring that every element would be Instagram perfect. But it wasn't just the wedding that made my life feel surreal. At 24, I was already teaching second grade at Magnolia Elementary, a job that filled my days with finger paintings, playground disputes, and the kind of pure joy that only 7-year-olds can bring to your world. My students adored me, parents requested me specifically for their children, and the principal had already hinted at potential advancement opportunities. Everything was falling into place exactly as I'd always dreamed it would. My family seemed to embody the American dream. Dad, Robert Richardson, was a successful architect whose firm had designed half the commercial buildings in Riverside County. Mom had been a real estate agent for 15 years, specializing in luxury homes, and together they'd built a life that looked picture perfect from the outside. We lived in a sprawling Mediterranean-style house in one of Riverside's most prestigious neighborhoods, complete with a pool, guest house, and perfectly manicured gardens that Mom tended with obsessive care. Then there was my sister, Natalie. Natalie was 18 months older than me, but you'd never know it from looking at us, where I was petite and blonde with what people generously called girl-next-door features. Natalie was tall, striking, with dramatic dark hair and the kind of bone structure that belonged on magazine covers. She was the one who'd been homecoming queen, who'd dated the quarterback, who'd been accepted to Stanford while I'd been thrilled just to get into a UC school. But somewhere along the way, our paths had diverged in ways that created an undercurrent of tension none of us liked to acknowledge. While I was building my career and planning my wedding, Natalie was struggling. She dropped out of Stanford after 2 years, claiming the pressure was too much. She'd moved back home, ostensibly to figure things out, but that was 3 years ago. Since then, she'd cycled through a series of jobs, retail, restaurants, a brief stint at a marketing agency, never seeming to find her footing. The dynamic between us had become increasingly complex as we'd entered our 20s. Growing up, Natalie had been my protector, my role model, the big sister who taught me how to apply eyeliner and helped me navigate the social minefield of high school. But lately, there was something else there. A sharpness in her comments, a way she looked at me sometimes that made me uncomfortable.
"You're so lucky everything just falls into place for you," she'd said just last week, watching me address wedding invitations in the kitchen. Her tone had been light, almost joking, but there was something underneath it that made my stomach clench. I'd laughed it off the way I always did. Lucky? I've been working 60-hour weeks between teaching and wedding planning. This didn't just fall into place. But Natalie had just shrugged and walked away, leaving me with that familiar feeling of having somehow disappointed her without understanding how. The truth was, I'd been managing type 1 diabetes since I was diagnosed at 16. It wasn't something I advertised. I'd learned early that people either treated you like you were fragile or they forgot entirely and acted surprised when you had to check your blood sugar or gave yourself insulin. I developed a routine that made it almost invisible to others. Testing my levels discreetly, keeping my insulin pens in a small cosmetic bag, timing my injections around meals and activities so seamlessly that most people never noticed. Jake knew, of course, and he'd been wonderful about it from the beginning. He'd educated himself about diabetes, learned to recognize the signs when my blood sugar was running high or low, and never once made me feel like it was a burden or complication in our relationship. My parents had been supportive too, though in that overly cautious way that sometimes made me feel like I was made of glass. But managing diabetes while teaching 26 second graders and planning a wedding had been challenging. Some days I felt like I was barely keeping my head above water. My blood sugar had been more erratic lately, swinging from highs that left me exhausted and foggy to lows that made me shaky and irritable. I had attributed it to stress. Wedding stress, work stress, family stress. Dr. Martinez, my endocrinologist, had adjusted my insulin dosages twice in the past month, but something still felt off. I'd been having more frequent episodes where my readings didn't make sense. Times when I'd eaten the same breakfast I always ate, taken the same amount of insulin, but my blood sugar would spike inexplicably. Or mornings when I'd wake up feeling terrible, test my levels, and find numbers that should have sent me to the emergency room, yet I felt relatively normal. It was confusing and frustrating, but with everything else on my plate, I kept telling myself it was just the stress and that things would settle down after the wedding. The wedding that was now just 3 days away. Our rehearsal dinner was tomorrow night, the ceremony was Saturday afternoon, and then Jake and I would fly to Maui for 10 days of honeymoon bliss. I had substitute lesson plans prepared, my classroom decorated with a "Mrs. Morrison will be back soon" sign, and a suitcase packed with sundresses and the kind of lingerie that made me blush to look at. Everything was perfect. Everything was exactly as I'd always dreamed it would be. So why did I have this nagging feeling that something was wrong? Maybe it was the way Natalie had been acting lately, more distant, more critical, asking pointed questions about Jake and whether I was sure about getting married so young. Maybe it was the way my blood sugar had been so unpredictable, making me feel like my own body was betraying me at the worst possible time. Or maybe it was just normal pre-wedding jitters, the kind of anxiety that was perfectly natural when you were about to promise to spend the rest of your life with someone. But as I sat in my childhood bedroom that morning, looking at the wedding dress hanging in my closet and the diabetes supplies neatly organized on my dresser, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was about to change. Not just because I was getting married, but something else. Something bigger. I had no idea how right I was. I had no idea that in less than 72 hours, I'd be lying in a hospital bed, staring at lab results that would rewrite everything I thought I knew about my life. I had no idea that my sister, the person I trusted most in the world after Jake, had been systematically sabotaging my health for months. And I had no idea that her betrayal, as devastating as it would be, was about to save my life in ways I never could have imagined. But that morning, sitting in the golden California sunshine, I was just Emma Richardson, a young woman about to become a bride, a teacher who loved her students, a daughter who thought she knew her family, and a person living with diabetes who trusted that the people closest to her wanted nothing but her happiness and health.
Sometimes ignorance really is bliss. And sometimes it's the only thing standing between you and a truth that will change everything. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
The phone call came at 7:23 a.m. on Thursday morning, exactly 48 hours before I was supposed to walk down the aisle. I was in the kitchen making my usual breakfast, steel-cut oats with blueberries and a precise measurement of honey that I'd calculated to keep my blood sugar stable, when my phone buzzed against the granite countertop. "Emma, honey, I need you to come to the office right away." It was Dr. Sandra Martinez, my endocrinologist, and there was something in her voice that made my stomach drop. In the 8 years she'd been treating my diabetes, I'd never heard her sound like this. Urgent, almost breathless, like she'd been running. "Dr. Martinez, is everything okay? Did something happen with my lab results?" I'd had routine blood work done the previous Monday, part of the pre-wedding health check that Jake had insisted we both get. Nothing dramatic, just the standard panels to make sure everything was functioning normally before we started our new life together. "I can't discuss this over the phone, Emma. Can you be here in an hour and bring someone with you? Your fiance, your parents, someone you trust." The oats suddenly tasted like cardboard in my mouth. "You're scaring me. What's wrong?" "1 hour, Emma. I'll explain everything when you get here." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone like it might offer some explanation for the knot of anxiety that was rapidly forming in my chest. In the background, I could hear Mom on a conference call with the florist, discussing last-minute changes to the centerpieces, and Dad's electric razor buzzing from their bathroom upstairs. Natalie was presumably still asleep. She'd been staying out late most nights recently, claiming she was helping with wedding errands, though I could never pin down exactly what those errands were. I called Jake immediately. He was already at his office. He'd been putting in extra hours to clear his schedule for the honeymoon, but when I told him about Dr. Martinez's call, he didn't hesitate. "I'm leaving now. Pick you up in 20 minutes. Whatever this is, we'll handle it together." That was Jake. Steady, reliable, the kind of person who faced problems head-on instead of spiraling into worst-case scenarios like I was already doing. As I waited for him, I found myself checking my blood sugar obsessively, as if the little numbers on the glucose meter might suddenly reveal what had Dr. Martinez so concerned. 127 milligrams per deciliter, perfectly normal for after breakfast. The drive to Dr. Martinez's office in downtown Riverside was torture. Jake kept trying to reassure me, suggesting logical explanations. Maybe there was an issue with the lab, maybe she'd mixed up my results with someone else's, maybe it was just a precautionary follow-up. But I couldn't shake the memory of her voice, the way she'd said, "Bring someone you trust," like she was about to deliver devastating news. Dr. Martinez's office was in a modern medical complex, all glass and steel that gleamed in the morning sun. We'd been there dozens of times over the years, routine checkups, medication adjustments, the occasional emergency when my blood sugar went haywire. It had always felt like a safe space, a place where my diabetes was just another manageable condition. But walking through those familiar doors that morning felt different, ominous. "Emma, Jake, thank you for coming so quickly." Dr. Martinez met us in the waiting room instead of having the nurse escort us back, which was immediately concerning. She was a small woman in her 50s, with prematurely gray hair and the kind of calm, competent demeanor that made patients trust her instinctively. But today, she looked shaken. Her office was exactly as I remembered. Diplomas on the walls, family photos on her desk, a small collection of thank you cards from grateful patients tacked to a bulletin board. She gestured for us to sit in the chairs across from her desk, but instead of settling behind it like usual, she pulled up a third chair so we were sitting in a small circle. "Emma, I've been practicing endocrinology for 22 years, she began, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I've seen complications, unusual presentations, rare conditions. But what I discovered in your lab results yesterday afternoon, I've never seen anything quite like it." Jake reached over and took my hand. His was steady and warm. Mine was cold and trembling.
The good news is that your A1C is excellent, 6.8%, which shows your long-term blood sugar control has been very good. Your kidney function is perfect, your thyroid levels are normal, everything we'd expect to see in a well-managed type 1 diabetic looks exactly as it should. She paused, and in that pause, I felt my world begin to tilt. But when we ran the comprehensive metabolic panel, something unusual showed up. Emma, there are traces of what appear to be diluted substances in your blood work, specifically markers that suggest your insulin has been tampered with. The words hit me like a physical blow. Tampered with? What do you mean tampered with? Your insulin appears to have been systematically diluted with saline solution over an extended period. That's why you've been experiencing such erratic blood sugar readings. You've been injecting what amounts to diluted medication. Sometimes you're getting full strength. Sometimes you're getting a fraction of what you need.
Jake's hand tightened around mine. Are you saying someone has been deliberately sabotaging Emma's insulin? Dr. Martinez nodded armly. The pattern is too consistent to be accidental. Someone with access to your medication has been replacing portions of your insulin with saline solution. The microscopic traces we found in your bloodstream, combined with the irregular glucose patterns you've been reporting, all point to deliberate tampering. The room seemed to spin around me. But that's impossible. I keep my insulin in my room, in my private bag. The only people who have access are... And then it hit me. The truth crashed over me like a wave of ice water, so obvious and so devastating that I couldn't understand how I'd missed it. Natalie, who had unrestricted access to our house, to my room, to all my personal belongings. Natalie, who had watched me manage my diabetes for 8 years and knew exactly how my routine worked. Natalie, who had seemed increasingly resentful and distant as my wedding approached. Natalie, who had made those strange comments about how lucky I was that everything fell into place for me. Emma! Dr. Martinez's voice seemed to come from very far away. Are you all right? I wasn't all right. Nothing was all right. The person I'd trusted most in the world, aside from Jake and my parents, had been systematically poisoning me. She'd been watching me struggle with unexplained blood sugar swings, seeing me frustrated and scared, knowing that she was the cause of it all. How long? My voice came out as barely more than a whisper. How long has this been happening? Based on the accumulation patterns, I'd estimate at least 3 to 4 months, possibly longer. 3 to 4 months. That timeline made horrible sense. It was right around the time that wedding planning had kicked into high gear, when the save the dates went out, when it became real that I was actually getting married and moving forward with my life. It was when Natalie had started making those cutting remarks, when she'd begun staying out late and being vague about where she'd been, when the dynamic between us had shifted from normal sibling tension to something darker. Dr. Martinez? Jake's voice was controlled, but I could hear the anger underneath. What could have happened if this had continued? What are the potential consequences? Unpredictable insulin dosing can lead to severe complications. Diabetic ketoacidosis, severe hypoglycemia, long-term organ damage. In extreme cases, well, let's just say that we caught this in time. Emma, you're incredibly lucky that you decided to get comprehensive blood work before your wedding. Lucky. There was that word again. The same word Natalie had been using, dripping with resentment and implication. But this wasn't luck. This was deliberate sabotage that could have killed me. We need to call the police, Jake said firmly. This is attempted murder. Wait. I held up a shaking hand. I need to understand this first. I need to confront her. I need to hear her admit what she's done. Dr. Martinez leaned forward. Emma, whoever is doing this is dangerous. They've been playing Russian roulette with your life for months. You need to prioritize your safety. But all I could think about was Natalie, my big sister,
My former best friend, the person who had taught me to drive and held my hair when I was sick and helped me pick out my prom dress, how had we gone from that to this? How had her resentment grown so toxic that she was willing to risk my life? As we left Dr. Martinez's office with his security plan for my medication and strict instructions to seek immediate medical attention if I experienced any unusual symptoms, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my family, my relationships, my life was about to change forever. The woman I was about to marry Jake as was already gone. The person walking out of that medical building was someone else entirely. Someone who now understood that the people closest to you could be the most dangerous, and sometimes the worst betrayals came wrapped in familiar faces and shared DNA. But I had no idea yet that this devastating discovery was just the beginning.
The drive home from Dr. Martinez's office felt like traveling through a nightmare where everything looked familiar, but nothing made sense anymore. Jake kept glancing at me from the driver's seat, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitching. We'd barely spoken since leaving the medical building, both of us trying to process the impossibility of what we'd just learned. "We have to tell your parents," Jake finally said as we pulled into our neighborhood. "Before we do anything else, they need to know what's been happening." But I wasn't ready for that conversation. I wasn't ready for the moment when I'd have to watch my parents' faces crumble as they realized their older daughter had been systematically poisoning their younger one. I wasn't ready to see the family I'd grown up believing was solid and loving revealed as something far more complicated and dangerous. "Not yet," I said, my voice hoarse. "I need to be sure. What if we're wrong? What if there's some other explanation?" Jake pulled into our driveway and turned to face me fully. "Emma, what other explanation could there possibly be? You heard Dr. Martinez. Someone with access to your insulin has been diluting it for months. Who else could it be?" I knew he was right, but except Natalie was supposed to be my protector, not my would-be killer. She was supposed to be excited about my wedding, maybe a little jealous, but not murderous. Sisters had rivalry, sure, but they didn't commit attempted homicide over wedding envy. "Maybe she didn't know how dangerous it was," I said weakly. "Maybe she thought she was just, I don't know, playing a prank? Making me feel sick so I'd postpone the wedding?" Even as the words left my mouth, I knew how ridiculous they sounded. Jake's expression confirmed it. "A prank?" His voice rose slightly. "Emma, she's been watching you struggle for months. She's seen you frustrated and scared about your blood sugar swings. She knows you have type 1 diabetes. There's no way she didn't understand exactly how dangerous this was." I got out of the car and walked toward the house on unsteady legs. Through the front windows, I could see Mom at the dining room table, surrounded by seating charts and place cards, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she made last-minute adjustments to the reception arrangements. She looked so normal, so blissfully unaware that her family was about to implode. "Where is she?" Jake asked as we approached the front door. "Where's Natalie?" "I don't know. She's been gone a lot lately. She says she's helping with wedding stuff, but..." I trailed off, realizing now that all those mysterious errands had probably been cover stories. While I thought she was picking up party favors or meeting with vendors, she'd actually been... what? Planning my destruction? Figuring out the perfect dosage of saline to inject into my insulin pens without killing me outright? The front door opened before we reached it. Natalie stood in the doorway, and for a split second, seeing her face sent a wave of relief through me. This was my sister, the person who'd taught me how to braid friendship bracelets and snuck me ice cream when I was grounded. Surely there had to be some mistake. But then I looked closer and saw something I'd been missing for months. There was a hardness around her eyes, a set to her mouth that spoke of secrets and resentment carefully concealed. How had I not noticed it before? "You're back early from your mysterious doctor's appointment," she said, stepping aside to let us in. "Everything okay?" The casual tone, the slight emphasis on mysterious, it all felt different now, calculated, like she was fishing for information while pretending not to care.
We need to talk, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Privately. Natalie's eyebrows rose. Sounds serious. Did Dr. Martinez find something wrong with your perfect health? There it was again, that edge of sarcasm, the implication that my life was too easy, too perfect. I'd attributed it to normal sibling jealousy before, but now it felt sinister. Mom, Dad, I called toward the dining room and living room respectively, can you come here for a minute? Actually, Jake interjected, putting a hand on my arm, maybe we should talk to Natalie alone first. But it was too late. Mom appeared from the dining room, still holding a handful of place cards, and Dad emerged from his home office where he'd been reviewing blueprints. They both look expectant, probably assuming we were there to discuss some last-minute wedding details.
What's going on? Mom asked, immediately picking up on the tension. Emma, you look pale. Are you feeling all right? I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. How do you tell your parents that one of their children has been trying to kill the other? How do you destroy a family's foundation with a single sentence? Emma had some unusual results in her blood work, Jake said carefully. Dr. Martinez found evidence that her insulin has been tampered with. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched my parents' faces change as they processed what Jake had said. Dad's expression went from confusion to disbelief to something approaching horror. Mom's hands flew to her mouth, the place cards scattering across the hardwood floor. Tampered with? Dad's voice was barely above a whisper. What does that mean? Someone has been diluting Emma's insulin with saline solution, Jake continued, his eyes never leaving Natalie's face. For months. That's why she's been having such erratic blood sugar readings. I was watching Natalie too, waiting for shock, denial, outrage, any of the reactions an innocent person would have to such an accusation. Instead, I saw something flicker across her features that looked almost like relief, as if a burden she'd been carrying was finally being lifted. That's, Mom started, then stopped, shaking her head. That's impossible. Who would do such a thing? Emma, honey, are you sure there wasn't some mistake at the lab? There's no mistake, I said, finding my voice at last. Dr. Martinez ran the tests twice. Someone with access to my medication has been systematically poisoning me. But who has access? Dad asked, his architect's mind already working through the logistics. Your insulin is in your room, in your personal bag. The only people who could get to it are... He trailed off as the same realization that had hit me earlier began to dawn on him. His eyes moved from me to Jake to Mom and finally settled on Natalie. The color drained from his face. Natalie? Mom's voice was small, uncertain. Honey, you wouldn't... And then, to my amazement, Natalie laughed. Not the nervous and comfortable laugh of someone falsely accused, but something bitter and almost triumphant. Finally, she said, crossing her arms over her chest, I've been practically leaving breadcrumbs. The admission hit the room like a bomb. Mom made a small, wounded sound. Dad took a step backward as if he'd been physically struck. Jake's hand found mine, gripping it tightly. Why? The word came out as barely more than a breath. Natalie, why would you do this to me? Her face transformed then, all pretense dropping away to reveal something ugly and raw that seemed to have been hiding just beneath the surface for months, maybe years. Why? She repeated, her voice rising. Do you really want to know why? Because I'm so tired of watching you float through life like everything is just handed to you on a silver platter. Perfect Emma with her perfect job and her perfect fiancé and her perfect wedding that's costing more than most people make in a year. Natalie, Dad started, but she cut him off. No, let me finish. Do you know what it's like being the older sister who can't get her life together while the younger one succeeds at everything she touches? Do you know what it's like watching your parents beam with pride every time Emma accomplishes something new while I'm still living at home at 26 with no career, no relationship, no future? Tears were streaming down Mom's face now. Honey, we're proud of you too. We love you both equally. Bullshit, Natalie snapped. When's the last time you bragged to your friends about something I did? When's the last time you showed me off the way you show off Emma? I'm the family disappointment, and she's the golden child, and I couldn't stand watching her have one more perfect moment. The pain in her voice was real, but it didn't excuse what she'd done. If anything, it made it worse, knowing that her actions came from a place of calculated resentment rather than temporary insanity. So you decided to kill me? I asked, my own anger finally breaking through the shock. That was your solution? Murder your sister because you're jealous of her life? I wasn't trying to kill you, Natalie said quickly, but there was something defensive in her tone that suggested she knew exactly how close she had come. That's when I realized that the sister I'd loved and trusted my entire life was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize at all.
The aftermath of Natalie's confession felt like standing in the wreckage of an earthquake. Mom had collapsed into Dad's arms, sobbing uncontrollably, while he stood frozen with shock, his hand mechanically patting her back. Jake had gone completely silent, his face a mask of controlled fury as he stared at my sister. And Natalie had retreated into herself, arms wrapped defensively around her body, looking for the first time like she understood the magnitude of what she'd done. But in that moment of devastation, something unexpected happened inside me. Instead of falling apart, instead of succumbing to the betrayal and horror of it all, I felt something steel-like forming in my chest, a clarity I'd never experienced before. Everyone needs to stop, I said, my voice cutting through Mom's sobs and the heavy silence. Right now. 4 pairs of eyes turned to me, and I realized that for the first time in my life, I was about to be the one making the decisions. Not my parents, not Jake, not even the circumstances themselves. Me. Jake, I need you to call the police, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Not to have Natalie arrested, not yet, but because we need this documented. Dr. Martinez said we need a paper trail. Emma, wait, Mom started, but I held up my hand. Mom, I know this is devastating. I know you want to protect both your daughters, but Natalie just admitted to systematically poisoning me for months. That's not a family issue we can handle privately. That's a crime. Natalie's face went pale. You can't be serious. You're really gonna have your own sister arrested? I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time saw past the familiar features to the stranger she'd apparently been all along. You're really gonna ask me that question after admitting you've been trying to make me sick for 4 months? I wasn't trying to make you seriously sick, she protested. You wanted me to fail, I finished. You wanted my wedding to be ruined. You wanted me to be afraid and confused and not understand what was happening to my own body. You got exactly what you wanted, Natalie. Congratulations. Dad finally found his voice. Emma's right. This can't be swept under the rug. Natalie, what you've done... Honey, this could have killed your sister. But it didn't. Natalie's voice rose to near hysteria. She's fine. She's standing right here. She's fine. I'm fine because I got lucky, I shot back. I'm fine because Jake insisted we get comprehensive blood work before the wedding. If we hadn't done that, if Dr. Martinez hadn't caught this, what would have happened next? How far were you planning to take this? The question hung in the air, and I could see from Natalie's expression that she had never actually thought that far ahead. She'd been so consumed with her resentment and her need to sabotage my happiness that she hadn't considered the end game. Jake was already on his phone with the police, speaking in low, controlled tones. I heard him mention medical tampering, insulin, attempted poisoning. Each word felt like another nail in the coffin of our family as I'd known it. There's something else, I said, and everyone turned to me again, something more immediate than police reports and criminal charges. I walked over to the dining room table where Mom's wedding preparations were spread out like a monument to optimism and careful planning. Place cards, seating charts, timeline sheets, vendor contact information, hundreds of hours of work representing the dream wedding we'd all been building toward.
The wedding is in 36 hours, I said, picking up one of the place cards with my soon-to-be-married name written in Mom's careful script. 200 guests, a reception venue, a photographer, a band, a honeymoon in Maui. Emma, Jake said carefully, we don't have to make any decisions about the wedding right now. We can postpone. No. The word came out with more force than I'd intended. No, we can't postpone, and we're not going to. The room went dead silent. Even Mom stopped crying. What do you mean? Dad asked. I set the place card down and turned to face my family, what was left of it anyway. I mean that Natalie has already stolen months of my health, my peace of mind, my sense of safety in my own home. She's already poisoned the last months of my engagement with worry and confusion and fear. But I'll be damned if I'm going to let her steal my wedding day too. But Emma, Mom said softly, how can we possibly celebrate when all of this... Because that's exactly what she wanted to prevent, I said, looking directly at Natalie. She wanted to ruin my wedding. She wanted me to be too sick or too stressed or too confused to get married. She wanted to take away the happiest day of my life. Well, guess what? She failed. I could see the shock on Natalie's face, as if she'd expected her confession to shatter me completely. Maybe she thought I'd collapse or postpone the wedding or spend weeks in therapy trying to process the betrayal. Maybe she thought this revelation would give her some twisted form of victory, even after being caught. You failed, Natalie, I continued, my voice getting stronger with each word. You spent months planning my downfall, and all you accomplished was proving to me how strong I really am. You wanted to show me failure. Instead, you showed me that I can survive anything, including betrayal by the person I trusted most. Jake was staring at me with something approaching awe. Are you sure about this, Emma? It's been an incredibly traumatic day. Maybe we should take some time to process everything before making major decisions. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Jake, do you still want to marry me in 36 hours? Of course I do. I'd marry you right now if we could. Then that's what we're doing. We're getting married on Saturday, exactly as planned. The only difference is that Natalie won't be there. The finality in my voice surprised even me. Mom made a small, wounded sound. Emma, she's your sister. No, I said quietly. My sister wouldn't have spent months systematically poisoning me. My sister would have been happy about my wedding, maybe a little jealous, but ultimately supportive. The person standing in this room is someone I don't know. I turned to address Natalie directly. You'll be gone before the wedding. I don't care where you go. Stay with friends, get a hotel room, move across the country. But you will not be at my wedding, and you will not be in this house when I come back from my honeymoon. You can't kick me out, Natalie said, but her voice lacked conviction. This is my home too. Actually, I think you'll find that Mom and Dad agree with me, I said, looking at my parents. Because the alternative is having you arrested before the wedding, and I think we'd all prefer to avoid that particular headline in the society pages. Dad's face was grim, but he nodded slowly. Natalie, you need to pack your things. Tonight. This is insane, Natalie exploded. You're all acting like I'm some kind of monster. I made a mistake, okay? I was angry and jealous, and I made a terrible mistake, but I'm still your daughter. I'm still Emma's sister. Mistakes are accidental, Jake said coldly. What you did was deliberate and sustained. You watched Emma suffer for months, and you continued doing it anyway. I walked over to my wedding dress, which was hanging on the back of the coat closet door where Mom had placed it for final alterations. I touched the delicate fabric, feeling the weight of all the dreams and hopes that had gone into choosing it. I'm going to put this dress on Saturday afternoon. I'm going to walk down the aisle to marry the man I love. I'm going to dance at my reception and cut my cake and throw my bouquet. I'm going to go on my honeymoon and start my married life exactly as I planned. I turned back to face the room. Because the only way Natalie truly wins is if she succeeds in destroying my happiness, and I refuse to give her that satisfaction. The commitment I was making wasn't just about the wedding. It was about refusing to let betrayal define me, refusing to let someone else's poison, literal or metaphorical, dictate the course of my life.
It was about choosing hope over fear, love over bitterness, and my own strength over someone else's weakness. For the first time since walking into Dr. Martinez's office that morning, I felt like myself again. Not the confused, sick version of myself that Natalie had been creating, but the real me, the person who could face anything and still choose joy. The person who was strong enough to get married in 36 hours, even if it meant doing it without the sister I once loved more than anyone in the world.
The next 24 hours tested every ounce of resolve I'd mustered in that devastating moment of decision. What had seemed like unshakable determination in the heat of confrontation proved much harder to maintain when faced with the practical realities of holding a wedding while your family imploded around you. The first challenge came within hours. Jake had barely finished giving his statement to Officer Patricia Williams, a kind woman in her 40s who specialized in domestic crimes, when my phone started ringing. Aunt Rebecca, Mom's sister from San Diego. "Emma, honey, your mother just called me crying so hard I could barely understand her. She said something about Natalie and the wedding being canceled. What's going on?" I found myself in the bizarre position of having to explain attempted poisoning to relatives who were supposed to be arriving tomorrow for my rehearsal dinner. How do you maintain wedding excitement while revealing that one of your bridesmaids won't be attending because she's been systematically sabotaging your health for months? "The wedding isn't canceled," I said firmly. Though saying it out loud to someone outside our immediate crisis made it feel both more real and more surreal. "Natalie won't be attending, but everything else is proceeding as planned." "Won't be attending? Emma, she's your maid of honor. She's supposed to give a speech. Her dress is hanging in your closet." That dress. I had forgotten about the bridesmaid dress. A beautiful lavender creation that had cost $400 and taken 3 fittings to get perfect. It was hanging next to my wedding gown like a monument to the sister relationship that no longer existed. By evening, I'd fielded 17 similar phone calls. Grandma Richardson demanded to know why her granddaughter was acting out so close to the wedding. Cousin Michael wanted to know if he should still bring his girlfriend since she'd only been invited because Natalie had specifically requested it. Jake's groomsmen were texting him asking if something was wrong because Natalie had been conspicuously absent from all the pre-wedding group chats. Each conversation was like reopening a wound. I found myself having to defend my decision to continue with the wedding to people who couldn't possibly understand the full situation. Some were supportive, others thought I was being too harsh, and a few suggested that family problems should be worked out privately after the wedding. "Maybe you should postpone," suggested Mrs. Henderson, our elderly neighbor who'd known me since I was 5. "Give everyone time to heal and work things out. Families fight, dear, but they also forgive." But this wasn't a fight. This wasn't hurt feelings or a misunderstanding that could be resolved with apologies and time. This was attempted murder disguised as sibling rivalry, and every well-meaning suggestion that I should work it out felt like a minimization of what I'd survived. The practical challenges were almost as difficult as the emotional ones. Natalie's absence left gaps everywhere, not just as maid of honor, but as the person who'd been supposedly coordinating various aspects of the wedding logistics. When I called the florist to confirm delivery times, they mentioned that Natalie had called earlier to make changes to the centerpieces. "What kind of changes?" I asked, my stomach dropping. "She wanted to switch from the white orchids to red roses. Said you'd changed your mind about the color scheme. We're supposed to deliver the new arrangements tomorrow morning." Red roses instead of white orchids. It was such a small thing, but it felt like another layer of sabotage. How many other helpful changes had she made without my knowledge? I spent the entire evening calling vendors to verify that my actual wedding plans were still in place. The caterer confirmed that Natalie had indeed called to reduce the guest count by 30 people. The photographer had received instructions to skip certain family photos, and the band had been told to avoid playing our first dance song because we had changed our minds. Every discovered manipulation felt like finding another piece of a puzzle I hadn't known existed. Jake found me at midnight, sitting on my childhood bed, surrounded by vendor contracts and frantically scribbled notes, trying to undo months of covert sabotage while ensuring my actual wedding could still happen. "Emma, you need to sleep," he said gently, sitting beside me.
We've corrected the major issues. Everything else we can handle tomorrow.
What if there are things we haven't found yet? I asked, feeling the weight of exhaustion and stress pressing down on me. What if she sabotaged something we won't discover until it's too late? Jake took the papers from my hands and set them aside. Then we'll handle it as it comes. But Emma, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. I looked at him, noting the concern in his eyes. What? Are you doing this for the right reasons? Are you insisting on going through with the wedding because you genuinely want to marry me tomorrow, or because you're trying to prove a point to Natalie? The question hit me like a physical blow, partly because it was so fair, and partly because I wasn't entirely sure of the answer. In the heat of my anger and determination, had I lost sight of what this day was supposed to mean? I started, then stopped. I don't know. Maybe both? Jake nodded, and I could see that my honesty hadn't hurt him. If anything, he looked relieved that I was being real with him. I love you, he said simply. I want to marry you more than anything in the world, but I don't want our wedding day to be about defeating your sister or proving your strength. I want it to be about us choosing each other. Tears started flowing then. The first real tears I'd shed since learning about Natalie's betrayal. All day, I'd been operating on adrenaline and righteous anger, but Jake's gentleness had cracked something open. I'm scared, I admitted. I'm scared that if we postpone, she wins. I'm scared that if we go through with it, everyone will remember our wedding as the day my family fell apart. I'm scared that no matter what we do, this will always be the shadow hanging over the beginning of our marriage. Jake pulled me into his arms, and for the first time that day, I allowed myself to feel small and uncertain instead of strong and decisive. What if we did something different? He said after a long moment. What if instead of the big wedding with all the family drama and vendor complications, we did something just for us? I pulled back to look at him. What do you mean? I mean, what if we went to the courthouse tomorrow morning and got married? Just the two of us. We could still have the reception for everyone else. All the food and flowers and music are already paid for. But the actual ceremony, the part that really matters, could be private. Just us making promises to each other without any of the outside noise. The idea was both terrifying and appealing. Part of me had been dreaming of walking down the aisle in that dress since I was 7 years old. But another part of me was exhausted by the thought of performing happiness for 200 guests while my family was in shambles. But people are already traveling here, I said. Your parents flew in from Denver. My college friends drove down from San Francisco. Everyone's expecting a wedding. And they'll get one. They'll get a beautiful reception with great food and dancing and celebration. The only thing that would be different is that we'd already be married when it started. I considered this, turning the idea over in my mind. It would solve so many problems. No awkward family dynamics during the ceremony, no questions about why the maid of honor was absent, no risk of Natalie somehow disrupting the proceedings. But it would also mean giving up the wedding I'd always thought I wanted, the moment I dreamed of, the symbolic ritual that was supposed to mark the beginning of our life together. I need to think about it, I said finally. Of course, we don't have to decide anything tonight. But as I lay awake in the pre-dawn hours, listening to the house settle around me and knowing that Natalie was somewhere packing her belongings to leave before morning, I realized that Jake's suggestion represented more than just a practical solution to our current crisis. It represented a choice between the wedding I'd always thought I wanted and the marriage I actually needed, one that began with honesty and flexibility rather than stubbornness and spectacle. The question was,
Which choice would I be able to live with for the rest of my life?
I woke up on Friday morning, the day before my wedding, to the sound of hushed voices drifting up from the kitchen. For a split second, in that hazy space between sleep and consciousness, everything felt normal. Then reality crashed back like a tidal wave, and I remembered that my sister had tried to kill me and my family was in pieces. The voices belonged to Mom and Dad, speaking in the kind of whispers people use when they're trying not to wake someone but are too upset to be truly quiet. I crept to the top of the stairs, not wanting to eavesdrop, but needing to understand what new crisis was unfolding. Can't just pretend this didn't happen, Patricia. Our daughter nearly died because of our other daughter. How do we even begin to process that? I know, Robert, but Emma's right. We can't let this destroy everything. The wedding has to go on. All those people, all that money. This isn't about money. Dad's voice was sharp with frustration. This is about Emma making a decision based on shock and anger that she might regret for the rest of her life. Maybe we should encourage her to postpone, get some therapy, really think through what she wants to do. I sank onto the top step, my heart hammering. Even my parents, the people who'd supported my decision to move forward, were having second thoughts. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe I was being reckless and stubborn, instead of strong and decisive. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Good morning, beautiful. How are you feeling about everything?" Before I could respond, another message came through. "BTW, there's something we need to discuss before you make any final decisions about today." The ominous tone made my stomach clench. I quickly got dressed and drove to Jake's apartment, which felt strange since we'd planned to spend the night before our wedding apart, according to tradition. But nothing about this situation was traditional anymore. Jake answered the door looking exhausted, his hair disheveled and dark circles under his eyes. He'd clearly slept as little as I had. "What's wrong?" I asked immediately. "Sit down," he said, gesturing toward his couch. "I got a call this morning from my cousin David, the prosecutor in Los Angeles." I nodded. David Morrison was a district attorney who'd handled several high-profile cases. Jake had called him the night before to get legal advice about Natalie's situation. "He did some research into medical tampering cases," Jake continued. "Emma, what Natalie did, this isn't just going to go away with a police report and a restraining order. If you decide to press charges, this becomes a felony case. She could go to prison for 10 years. The words hit me like a physical blow. 10 years? Aggravated assault with intent to cause bodily harm, using a deadly weapon, which in this case is the medical tampering itself. David says that given the sustained nature of what she did, the premeditation involved, and the fact that you have a life-threatening medical condition, prosecutors would likely pursue the maximum penalties." I stared at him, my mind reeling. 10 years? Natalie was 26 years old. 10 years would take her into her mid-30s, would destroy any chance she had of building a normal life, would mark her as a felon forever. "But here's the thing," Jake continued gently. "If you're going to press charges, you need to decide today. David says that waiting, especially if we go through with the wedding and honeymoon, could be seen as minimizing the severity of what happened. It could make prosecution more difficult. So I have to choose," I said slowly, "between getting married tomorrow and sending my sister to prison." "No, Emma, you don't have to choose anything, but you do need to understand the full implications of whatever decision you make." I stood up and walked to Jake's window, looking out at the parking lot where normal people were going about their normal Friday activities, grocery shopping, heading to work, living lives that didn't involve impossible moral dilemmas. "There's something else," Jake said softly. I turned back to him, not sure I could handle another revelation. "My mom called this morning. She and Dad are concerned about the timing of everything. They're wondering if we should postpone the wedding and get some couples counseling first." "Couples counseling?" My voice rose. "Why? What does this have to do with our relationship?" "They think that getting married in the middle of a family crisis and potential criminal case might not be the best foundation for a marriage.
They're worried that we're making emotional decisions instead of rational ones. I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. What do you think? Jake was quiet for a long moment. I think that if we postpone this wedding, if we let your sister's actions dictate the timeline of our life together, then she wins. But I also think that my parents aren't wrong about the stress this is putting on us. As if summoned by our conversation, Jake's phone rang. His mother's name appeared on the screen.
"I should take this," he said apologetically. I listened to one side of a conversation that made my heart sink progressively lower. Mrs. Morrison was clearly upset, clearly convinced that we were making a mistake, clearly suggesting that maybe Jake should really think about whether this is the right time. When he hung up, his face was grim. "She's threatening not to come to the wedding if we go through with it tomorrow. She says she can't support us making such an important decision while we're emotionally compromised." The irony was devastating. I was losing family members on both sides. First Natalie through her betrayal, now potentially Jake's parents through their disapproval. The very people who were supposed to celebrate our union were abandoning us when we needed support most. "Maybe they're right," I said quietly. "Maybe we are being emotional instead of rational. Maybe we should postpone." "Is that what you want?" I looked at Jake, really looked at him. This man who'd stood by me through the worst day of my life, who'd called the police when I was too shocked to function, who'd spent hours helping me undo Natalie's sabotage of our wedding plans. This man who was supposed to be my partner in all things, including the difficult decisions. "I want to marry you," I said. "I want to start our life together. But I also don't want to send my sister to prison, and I don't want your parents to hate me, and I don't want our wedding to be remembered as the day everything fell apart." "Those might all be true no matter when we get married," Jake pointed out. "Postponing doesn't change what Natalie did. It doesn't change the legal implications. It just delays having to deal with them." Before I could respond, my own phone rang. Dr. Martinez. "Emma, I hope I'm not overstepping, but I wanted to check in on how you're doing, both physically and emotionally." "I'm managing?" I said. "Why?" "Because I've been thinking about your case all night, and there's something I need to tell you, something that might change how you view this entire situation." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "The blood work we ran revealed something else, something I didn't mention yesterday because I thought it might be an anomaly, but I've now run the tests 3 times, and the results are consistent." "Dr. Martinez, you're scaring me." "Emma, the insulin tampering may have actually saved your life. Your pancreas has been showing signs of failure that we missed in previous checkups. If Natalie hadn't been diluting your insulin, forcing us to do comprehensive blood work, we might not have caught this until it was too late." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that while your sister was trying to harm you, she inadvertently led us to discover a serious deterioration in your condition that requires immediate treatment. Without this discovery, you could have gone into complete pancreatic failure within the next 6 months." I sank onto Jake's couch, my mind struggling to process this impossible twist. So Natalie, trying to hurt me, actually saved me. Yes, the irony is almost incomprehensible. After I hung up, Jake and I sat in stunned silence. Everything I thought I understood about the situation had just been turned upside down. The sister who'd betrayed me had also unknowingly saved me. The blood work that revealed her attempts to poison me had also revealed a condition that could have killed me if left undetected. "What do we do with this information?" I asked finally. "I don't know," Jake admitted. "Does it change anything about pressing charges?" "I don't know. Does it change anything about the wedding?" We looked at each other, 2 people who thought they had everything figured out, now realizing they understood nothing at all. Maybe we need to stop trying to make all these decisions based on what other people want or expect. Maybe we need to figure out what we actually want, separate from everyone else's opinions. It was a simple concept that felt revolutionary in that moment. What did I actually want? Not what would prove a point to Natalie, not what would satisfy my parents or his parents or the wedding guests or the prosecutors. What did Emma Richardson actually want for her life?
For the first time in 2 days, I had no idea.
Friday evening arrived like a storm front, heavy with the weight of decisions that couldn't be delayed any longer. I sat in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by the debris of a life that had seemed perfect just 48 hours earlier. My wedding dress hung mockingly in the corner, the lavender bridesmaid dress beside it like a ghost of the sister I'd thought I knew. On my desk lay 3 separate documents: Dr. Martinez's updated medical report, the police incident report, and a formal complaint that would initiate criminal charges against Natalie. All I had to do was sign one piece of paper to send my sister to prison for up to 10 years. The rehearsal dinner was supposed to start in 2 hours. 37 family members and friends were gathering at Riverside's most exclusive restaurant to celebrate Jake and me on the eve of our wedding. The irony wasn't lost on me that we were about to rehearse a ceremony that might not happen, surrounded by people who had no idea that the bride's family was imploding in real time. Jake knocked softly on my bedroom door. "Emma, can I come in?" I looked up from the paper scattered across my comforter. He was wearing the navy suit he'd picked for the rehearsal dinner. He looked handsome and nervous and completely out of place in my childhood sanctuary of white furniture and pink walls. "How bad is it downstairs?" I asked. "Your parents are putting on brave faces, but I can see the cracks. Your mom keeps checking her phone like she's hoping Natalie will call. Your dad looks like he aged 10 years overnight." Jake sat on the edge of my bed, careful not to disturb the papers. "My parents just called. They're not coming to the rehearsal dinner." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" "They say they can't pretend to celebrate when they believe we're making such a serious mistake. They think we need professional help before we get married, not a wedding celebration." I stared at him, feeling pieces of my carefully constructed resolve begin to crumble. "So we're losing your family too?" "It looks that way. And if I don't press charges against Natalie, she gets away with attempted murder. But if I do press charges, I'm sending the person who accidentally saved my life to prison for up to 10 years. Jake reached over and took my hand. "Emma, there's something else." I didn't think I could handle another revelation, but I nodded for him to continue. "I went to see Natalie this afternoon." "You what?" I pulled my hand away. "Why would you do that without telling me?" "Because I needed to understand something. I needed to look her in the eye and try to figure out if she really comprehends what she did." Jake ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized as his tell when he was deeply stressed. "She's staying at a motel near the highway. When I got there, she was broken, Emma. Completely destroyed. She kept saying she never meant for things to go this far, that she just wanted you to postpone the wedding, not to actually hurt you." "And you believe her?" "I think she believes it. But Emma, that doesn't change the fact that she knew exactly what insulin tampering could do to a diabetic. She watched you struggle for months and kept doing it anyway." I felt tears threatening and fought them back. I'd cried enough in the past 2 days to last a lifetime. "She asked me to give you something," Jake continued, pulling a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. "She said she wrote it before she knew about the pancreatic condition, before she knew that her betrayal accidentally saved your life." I took the letter with trembling hands. My name was written across the front in Natalie's familiar handwriting, the same handwriting that had addressed my birthday cards for 24 years. "Did you read it?" "No. She sealed it. Said it was between sisters." I stared at the envelope, afraid of what it might contain. Another manipulation, a genuine apology, a confession that would make everything even more complicated than it already was. Before I could decide whether to open it, my phone rang. Mom's voice came through the speaker, strained and artificial. "Emma, honey, some of the guests are starting to arrive at the restaurant. Are you and Jake ready to head over?" I looked around my room at the evidence of my shattered life, then at Jake's concerned face, then at the letter from the sister who tried to destroy me, and
accidentally saved me instead. Mom, I need you to cancel the rehearsal dinner. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for an eternity.
Cancel it? Emma, what are you talking about? 37 people are expecting... I can't do it, Mom. I can't sit in a room full of people pretending to celebrate when I don't even know if I'm getting married tomorrow. I heard my mother's sharp intake of breath. Emma, you're scaring me. What's wrong? What's changed? Everything. Nothing. I don't know anymore. Jake was watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Not judgment, not concern, just attention. Like he was waiting to see who I would choose to be in this moment. I'll call the restaurant, Mom said finally. I'll tell them there was a family emergency. There was, I said quietly. There is. After I hung up, Jake and I sat in silence for several minutes. Outside my window, I could see neighbors going about their Friday evening routines, walking dogs, bringing in mail, living normal lives in a world that made sense. I need to read this letter, I said finally. Do you want me to leave? No, I need you here. Whatever it says, I need you to hear it too. I opened the envelope with hands that shook despite my best efforts to stay calm. Natalie's handwriting filled 2 pages, and I read it aloud so Jake could hear every word. Emma, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to understand. I'm not even sure I understand it myself. For months, I've been watching you live the life I thought I wanted, and instead of being happy for you, I let jealousy poison everything good in me. I told myself I wasn't really trying to hurt you, just make you sick enough to postpone the wedding. But that was a lie, and I think I knew it even then. I knew exactly what I was doing to your insulin. I knew exactly what that could do to someone with diabetes. I told myself it was just a prank, but pranksters don't continue for months when they see their victims suffering. The truth is, I wanted you to fail. I wanted something in your perfect life to go wrong because it felt unfair that you had everything I wanted and couldn't achieve. I convinced myself that you didn't deserve your happiness because it came so easily to you. I never stopped to think that maybe your life looked easy because you worked so hard to make it look that way, or that your happiness was something you'd earned, not something you'd stolen from me. I know saying I'm sorry doesn't fix what I did. I know that the fact that I accidentally helped doctors discover your pancreatic condition doesn't excuse the fact that I was systematically poisoning you for months. I know that the best thing I can do for you now is disappear from my life completely. But Emma, I need you to know that underneath all the jealousy and resentment and inexcusable choices, I do love you. I have always loved you. You were the best sister anyone could have asked for, and I threw that away because I couldn't stand being the worst one. Get married tomorrow. Be happy. Live the life you've built for yourself. Don't let my failures become your limitations. I'll turn myself in to the police on Monday morning. Whatever happens to me, I deserve it. You don't deserve to carry the burden of deciding my fate on top of everything else you're dealing with. I love you, and I'm sorrier than I'll ever be able to express. Natalie. By the time I finished reading, tears were streaming down both our faces. Jake moved closer and put his arms around me, and I let myself collapse against his chest. She's gonna turn herself in, I said through my tears. She's taking the decision away from me. How do you feel about that? I considered the question seriously. How did I feel? Relief that I wouldn't have to choose between justice and mercy? Grief that this was how our relationship was ending? Anger that even in her confession she was trying to control the narrative? I paused, searching for the right words. I feel like I've been holding my breath for 2 days and I can finally exhale. But even as I said it, I realized that breathing again didn't solve my other problem. I still had to decide if I was getting married in 14 hours, and I still had no idea what I actually wanted to do.
Saturday morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect California day that seemed designed for weddings. I woke up on what was supposed to be my wedding day with a clarity I hadn't felt in months.
Not just since Natalie's betrayal was discovered, but since long before that, when my blood sugar had been erratic and I'd been living in a constant state of low-level confusion and fatigue. For the first time, I understood that the person I'd been for the past 4 months, tired, anxious, second-guessing myself, that hadn't been me at all. That had been me under the influence of systematically sabotaged medication. The real me was stronger, clearer, more decisive than I'd remembered. Jake was already awake when I called him at 6 a.m. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, and I could hear the question in his voice. "How are you feeling?" "Like myself. For the first time in months, I feel like myself." "And what does yourself want to do today?" I looked out my bedroom window at the sunrise painting the sky and shades of pink and gold. "She wants to get married, but not the way we planned." An hour later, Jake and I stood in my parents' kitchen facing Mom and Dad across the breakfast table, where I'd eaten cereal before school for 18 years. They looked exhausted, aged by the events of the past few days, but they were listening. "We want to get married today, but we want to do it here, in the backyard, with just family and a few close friends. We want Dr. Martinez to be there, because without her, none of this would have come to light. We want to turn this day into a celebration of truth and healing, not just tradition and spectacle." Mom's eyes filled with tears. "Emma, honey, the venue's paid for, the flowers, the photographer, all those guests can be redirected to a beautiful reception party," Jake finished. "We'll still use everything we've paid for. We'll still celebrate with everyone who traveled to be here. But the actual ceremony, the part where we promise to love each other through everything life throws at us, that needs to be intimate and real." Dad cleared his throat. "What about Natalie?" It was the question I'd been dreading and preparing for simultaneously. "I called her this morning. Before she turns herself into the police on Monday, I want her to be here. I want her to see that she didn't destroy me. I want her to understand that the sister she tried to sabotage is strong enough to find joy even in the middle of heartbreak." Mom made a small sound of surprise. "You want her at your wedding after everything?" "I want her to see who I really am when I'm not being slowly poisoned. I want her to see that the person she was so jealous of isn't someone who just gets lucky. It's someone who chooses happiness, even when happiness seems impossible." Jake reached over and took my hand. "And I want to marry the woman who's brave enough to invite her would-be killer to witness her joy. That's the person I fell in love with, someone who responds to betrayal with grace instead of bitterness." The next few hours were a whirlwind of phone calls and rapid replanning. The wedding venue graciously agreed to host our reception without the ceremony, understanding that there had been a family emergency. Mom called her garden club friends, who descended on our backyard like a fairy godmother army, transforming it with white chairs, flowing fabric, and arrangements of the white orchids I'd originally chosen. Dr. Martinez agreed to attend, saying she'd never seen someone handle a medical crisis with such resilience. Jake's parents, when they heard about our scaled-down plans and understood that we were approaching marriage as a commitment to support each other through difficulty rather than an elaborate party, decided to drive down from their hotel after all. By 3 p.m., our backyard looked like something from a magazine. But more importantly, it felt like home.
Natalie arrived at 3:30, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. She'd clearly been crying, her eyes red and swollen, but she was dressed appropriately and carried herself with a dignity I hadn't expected. "Emma," she said when she saw me in my wedding dress, the same dress I'd dreamed of wearing, now serving a purpose I'd never imagined. "You look happy," I finished for her. "I look happy, and that's not because everything in my life is perfect. It's because I'm choosing to be happy despite the fact that everything isn't perfect." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand now. I thought your happiness was something that just happened to you. I didn't realize it was something you created." The ceremony itself was brief but profound. Our pastor, who'd known me since childhood, spoke about how marriage is tested not by the absence of crisis, but by how couples choose to face crisis together. Jake and I exchanged vows we'd written that morning, promises that acknowledged both the joy and the struggle we'd already experienced together. "Emma," Jake said, looking into my eyes as 30 people sat in reverent silence around us, "you've shown me this week what it means to choose love over fear, healing over revenge, and hope over despair. I promise to be the kind of partner who helps you remember your own strength, especially when you forget it yourself." My voice was steady as I responded, "Jake, you've stood beside me through the darkest revelation of my life without wavering. You've helped me understand that real love isn't about avoiding problems together, it's about facing them together. I promise to be your partner in all of it, the beautiful and the broken, the easy and the impossible." When we kissed as husband and wife, I felt something shift in my chest. Not just the joy of marrying the man I loved, but the deep satisfaction of knowing I'd chosen my response to betrayal rather than letting betrayal choose my response. The reception that evening was everything we'd planned and more. Our guests, who'd learned only that there had been a family situation that required a change of venue, embraced the garden party atmosphere with enthusiasm. The band played, people danced, and the cake was cut with all the ceremony we'd originally planned. But the most meaningful moment came near the end of the evening, when Natalie approached Jake and me during a quiet song. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want you to know that seeing you today, seeing how you turned the worst thing I've ever done into something beautiful, it's taught me more about who I want to be than anything else ever has." "Natalie," I said, taking her hand, "what you did was unforgivable, but you're still my sister, and I still love you. Those two things can both be true at the same time." She squeezed my hand and walked away, back towards the motel where she'd spend her last night of freedom before turning herself in to face the consequences of her choices. 3 months later, Jake and I returned from our delayed honeymoon to news that Dr. Martinez's early detection of my pancreatic deterioration had allowed for treatment that completely halted the progression. Without the comprehensive blood work triggered by Natalie's sabotage, I would have been an organ failure within 6 months. Natalie pleaded guilty to aggravated assault and received a sentence of 3 years in prison with the possibility of parole in 18 months. I visit her sometimes, not because I've forgotten what she did, but because I refuse to let her actions define the boundaries of my capacity for grace. My life now is different than it was before I learned about the betrayal. I'm more careful about trust, more aware of my own strength, more intentional about choosing joy rather than waiting for it to happen to me. My marriage to Jake is deeper because it was forged in crisis rather than just celebration. But perhaps most importantly, I've learned that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can also be the thing that saves your life, not despite its cruelty, but because of how you choose to respond to that cruelty. I am Emma Morrison now, a woman who survived attempted murder by her own sister and chose to respond with a wedding instead of revenge. I teach second graders who remind me daily that resilience is the most important lesson anyone can learn. And every morning when I check my blood sugar with medication I now store in a locked case, I'm reminded that my life is a gift I almost lost and a choice I make every day. The betrayal didn't save my life. My response to the betrayal saved my life. And that makes all the difference.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.